This is No Extra Words, Season 3, Chris's audio book journal for March 4th, 2019. Hello, No Extra Words listeners. How are you today? I'm happy to be on here talking to you all about books, and today we're going to talk reading goals. What they are, should you have one, should I have one, and how having and not having one through different points in my life has affected me. I'm going unscripted. Season 3 is all about the very lo-fi, very off-the-cuff conversation with you about my reading life. So, I am someone who doesn't do well when I don't read. That's been true basically since I first learned to read at the age of 4. I do better when I have books in my life. Sometimes I go through lulls where I don't read as much, but I never stop. And when I go through a lull, what I find is it's not so much that I stop reading, it's that I go back to the very familiar. I read Anne of Green Gables for the 900th time. I kind of sink into something like that. But I am someone who doesn't function well if I don't have a reading life. So I'm going to preface everything I'm going to say here with that as the background. Some people can go through phases of their life without reading, and that's okay. I just don't happen to be one of those people. I became a mom, it's almost 5 years ago now. My oldest will be 5, April 30th. So, and up until basically the day that I delivered, I was a full-time working librarian. So reading was kind of a job requirement, especially when you work in schools or in youth services in the library. You got to have familiarity with your collection because you have to be able to talk off the cuff with your kids about the books that you've read, the books that are on the shelves. So, while not all librarians are readers, that's a stereotype that we can explore if we ever want to talk about different kinds of librarians. If you're somebody who works the kind of jobs that I worked, you have to be. It's really not a choice. And so I was somebody who always had a stack of books at home, who was always reading the stuff that was coming in new, who was keeping up with what was new in the world of kids and YA lit. And then I had a baby. And my son was delivered really quickly. He came 7 weeks early. It was just, you're going to have a baby, but there's a difference between I'm going to have a baby in 2 months and suddenly standing there in the NICU and you have a baby and your whole life has just gone up on its head. The first thing that I did was I read Charlotte's Web to my newborn preemie son in the NICU because I didn't know what else to do, and reading to him was a way that I could bring control on my world. So it's interesting to me that in the times of the biggest stress of my life, what I have done is reach for books. But then he came home, and anybody who's ever had a new baby knows it's not a time in your life when you have a lot of functioning brain power to do those things like pick up a book. I had been reading before he was born a book about World War I. I love World War I history. If you've heard the Anne of Green Gables 5 episode, it's got my whole relationship with World War I on it. But in that early postpartum period with my first child, I actually had to make my husband hide that book from me because it would depress me, but I couldn't put it down. It was this kind of travel book about a writer walking through the battlefields of World War I. So it's super depressing. And I couldn't read it, but I also couldn't put it down. And so my reading life in the early years of motherhood became kind of random. I was going to the library, but I was getting more kids' books. I wasn't spending a lot of time browsing for myself. I would pick up books at the bookstore like I'd always done, and then I'd read them or read a few pages of them, or they'd get left around the house, and I'd kept going back to reading the things that were comfortable and familiar. And again, there's nothing wrong with any of that. I'm a big proponent of rereading, and I think a comforting book can be a huge thing in a time of stress. But I got to a point where I kind of needed to re-energize my reading life. I remember a conversation I had many years before I myself became a mom with a coworker who was a librarian who adopted a toddler. I think he was a year and a half or so when she brought him home. It was her first child. And being thrown into that world of motherhood, again, she goes from being a full-time working librarian to being on maternity leave with a toddler. And after a couple of months of adjusting to motherhood, her husband actually said to her, he said, I think you will do better if we get you some reading time, because I think this is something that you're missing from your life that will ground you. And that became very important. And I think self-care in that postpartum period, and believe me, adoptive moms can have postpartum adjustment challenges as well, because some of it's hormonal, but some of it is just the reality of being thrust into motherhood. And so I faced some of that same kind of thing of needing to get back my life as a reader, and that being really important to my mental health and stability. But it took a long time. And I think looking back, the reason for it was because I didn't realize that maybe I needed more of a plan for reading than I had before, because I used to work in a giant room full of books. So I had the constant access, and I was the one who touched them when they first came in the door. So I had the constant awareness of what was coming out. So I maybe didn't need to organize my reading life as much as I would need to when I sort of became a civilian again. And I didn't know that at the time. But looking back, I know that now. About the time that I changed the format of this show from season 1 to season 2, so a little over a year ago, I joined Goodreads for the second time. I had a Goodreads account from back in the day, and I actually went into it to see if it was kind of worth salvaging, and I just realized it was stressing me out at the time because I was feeling overwhelmed, and I didn't know how to use it, and I didn't know how it would help me. So I ended up just deleting it. It was the book that was listed as being currently read was a wedding planning book, and I got married in 2010. So that's how old the account was. So I just started fresh, and I did with Goodreads what I was doing with the podcast at that point, which was just trusting my instincts and doing the things that felt right to me. So I started keeping track of what I was reading and what I wanted to read. And I put things that I had read in the past on there if they would help me in podcast prep or anything like that. So my want to read list started to grow because I was in the world of books, and I had by that time gone back to work part-time, very, very part-time. I don't work a ton, but at least I work a little bit, and was also in the world of books on social media and had kind of sort of jumped back into that. So my want to read list just started growing and growing and growing. And while I am certainly a reader and I read a lot, I don't have the reading time I once had because I have 2 kids. At that point, I had 1 kid. I was pregnant when I started my Goodreads account. And so that want to read list just started growing. And I also knew there was this looming baby was coming, and I wasn't sure how much reading I was going to do in that kind of immediate postpartum period. I wanted to give myself grace. But a couple months into my Goodreads account life, I did something I hadn't done in a really, really, really long time. I made myself a summer reading list. I took a look at the things I was reading. I took a look at the things that were sitting around on my shelves. And I was due in August, so I knew I had some time. And I thought, okay, what do I really want to read this summer? And I set myself what I thought was a pretty reasonable goal. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it was 6 books. I started the goal around Memorial Day, and I knew that I was going to be done when baby came. And at that point I didn't know, my first child came 7 weeks early. So I was super prepared for baby to come as early as the beginning part of July. And so I gave myself what I thought was a very reasonable reading goal and completed it and got some books read that I really had wanted to read, but wasn't making time in my life for one reason or another. Some of it was because they were very long. One of them was the Lucy Maud Montgomery Treasury, which is huge. It's a coffee table book and it's like 400 pages long. One of them was a first novel that one of my podcast contributors had sent to me that I wanted to read, but it was outside my normal kind of genre and stuff. And so I wanted to make time in my world for it. So just things like that. And I completed my reading goals and got some other things for the summer off of my Goodreads list and was almost done. There was one, I think maybe one that I didn't finish before baby came that I ended up returning and putting on my try again list. But it felt really good to have this set of goals and to complete it. And I can't remember the last time I did that, to be honest with you. I really can't remember the last time I had a reading goals list. I know I've done it. I know I've done it in the past. But I became a librarian and started working in libraries so young in my life. Like, I got my first kind of grown up, I shelved books a little bit in between things when I was in my early 20s, but my first kind of grown up real librarian job I got in February of 2004. 2004? Yeah, 2004. And I was 25. So I was pretty young in my life. And ever since then, I've always worked in libraries. So that makes the having of goals, I think, a little bit less necessary because you just have this constant flow of books through your hands, and you're at conferences and you're on pulse with the book world. And so I don't think that the having of goals is as necessary. Although I will say it probably would have helped me back in the day, because one of the things I used to struggle with early in my library career is just I would get overwhelmed with books, because every time I'd see something I liked, I took it home and I would read some of them, and some of them would just pile up. And I don't know when I finally broke that habit. Finally realized that the library can hold the books and I don't have to have them all in my house. Because it's just stressful. They start to pile up. And that's why I do like Goodreads, and I have come to really enjoy having a want to read list, because I don't have to kind of remember them. My line for a long time when people would ask me, have you read this or that or such and such, was I had it at home for a while, which I think is the librarian's answer for I was gonna, but because I would check it out. It would sit at home for a while. It would come due and it would go back. And looking back, I probably could have done better with list keeping back in the day, but you live and learn. But that summer reading list really helped me. And I think it also helped me get back on the horse a little bit with reading after baby number 2 came in August, because I had fresh in my mind how good it felt to be in that reading habit. And so, no, I didn't read very much when I was immediately postpartum with baby number 2, but it didn't take as long to come out of the fog reading wise. I found myself reaching for books within, a couple months. I was back in the saddle of ordering things at the library, letting myself back in gently, but definitely by November, December, I was really back in much more of a reading habit. And I think part of it is because I've been a mom for almost 5 years now, so I understand that I don't have time and that I just have to it's not going to make itself. I still don't have time. I don't have time to read, and I don't have time to write because I have 2 kids under 5, but I do anyway because it's important. And I read with a baby on me a lot. It's one of the things that I do sometimes when my son is in preschool is I'll sit in the church library and the baby will sleep on me and I will read a book. Sometimes I get more reading done if I'm not at home. If I go home, there's Netflix. If I'm at the church library, their Wi-Fi is not as good. So there's not as good a Netflix. And so having that fresh in my mind, the goal setting, one of the things that I did a while back, and I can't remember exactly when, but I kind of reorganized my Goodreads list a little bit and put my want to read books into categories. I took all the picture books out and put them in their own category because I have a different flow to how I use picture books in my life, and getting them mixed in with all the other stuff was not working. And then I use Goodreads to catalog my winter holiday collection, which is a completely its own thing. So I have a to read winter holiday collection list to get them in their own space. And then I created a to read top picks list where I would put things that are really high on my radar screen that I was really thinking about. I would dump them there. So I would know when I was placing library holds kind of where to look and stuff. And it was working-ish, but it still didn't feel as organized. And my want to read list was up above 200 again, which felt like a lot. So around the new year, you clean house and you do things and you organize things. And I thought, I'm going to have a plan. I have some kind of a plan for what I'm going to read in 2019. And I didn't know how many books to set as a goal, but I knew from my experience from the summer to set it low. So I think I started with 14. I changed the name of that top picks reading list on Goodreads to read 2019. So I gave myself a deadline. And I went through that list and left some stuff on it and took some stuff off of it and added some new stuff to it that it was on the top of my list. And then in the week or so around the new year, I just kept adding things to it. And I think it topped out at 21, I want to say. And then I also include in my what I wanted to read in 2019, everything I was currently reading at that point at the new year. So all told, between the currently reading and the to read 2019, it's probably around 25 or so books, which is about 2 a month, which seemed reasonable. And I thought there was a good chance I'd probably get that done early. But even if I didn't, I felt like it was something I could do sustainably in 2019. And so that was the digital organization of the list. And some of the things that were on it I own, and some of the things that were on it I don't own. And so I knew what I had to go place library holds on. Some of the things were going to be a bit of a wait. And that's the other Goodreads list that I created, is I created a to read owned. So when I find something on my want to read list that I know that I have a copy of in the house somewhere, I can move it over there. I know some people are very organized about knowing of the things they own in their house, what they've read and what they've not read. I have never been that organized. I can tell you when I look at it. Like, I have 3 bookshelves in my house that are for the adult books. And then each of my kids has a bookshelf in their room. When I walk through the adult bookshelves and look at them, I can tell you what on those shelves I haven't read. And I can usually tell you what on those shelves isn't mine, because it's not an incredibly organized collection. It is a bit, but not really. And so my books and my husband's books are kind of mixed together. We just did a big book purge. So now everything is sitting there, spine out, and you can see it. That's as close to organization as I get. So when I look at them, I can tell you whether or not I've read them. And I can tell you if I haven't read them, if it's because I want to, like they're on my unread shelf, or it's because they're not mine. Like, there are many things that are his that I have no intention of reading. But I'm not organized enough to know all of what's here. I don't have a catalog anywhere of my personal books, except for the winter holiday collection, which is its own thing. And it lives in boxes when it's not the season. And so when I find something, some things I know that, I own and they're on the to read list. But when I find something in the house, it's like, oh yeah, I do have that on my Goodreads list. I'll slide it over to that list so that I know that it's not something I have to procure. The other category that I've added pretty recently is the to read not at library. And that's when I go looking for something that's on the to read list and I realize that I can't get it from any of the libraries I belong to. I have a stash of library cards. They're all legal. It's all above board. I'll talk about that some other time too. But if I can't get it from any of them, then I'll slide onto that list, because then I know either it's going to sit on that list until I find a copy of it. I'm just going to keep my eyes open until I see it. Or it's something I'm going to ask the library to interlibrary loan for me. Because those are generally out of print. The ones that are brand new. And if they're brand new, I can often ask the library to get it for me. I don't buy a lot of new releases. I buy some, but I don't order books from bookstores so much. I do on occasion, but I tend to be more of a browser in bookstores. And if there are specific things I want, I get those from the library. It's kind of my MO. So I had this to read 2019 list. And then the other thing that was going on is in the world of physical books in my house, we have this cool spinning book rack that my husband got as a gift from someone. And I've used it for different things over time. Oftentimes it'll be books that I kind of want to display because it's in a prominent place in the living room. So it will be like, books that look pretty, that are kind of older or whatever, because people see it because it's in my living room. When my first was a little toddler, it was board books, because then he could kind of destroy it. And at Christmas time, it's usually used for the Christmas books. So I was emptying it and restocking it at the new year, because that process was ending. And rather than put all the things back on it that had been on it, I decided, wouldn't it be fun to put the stuff I want to read this year on it? Like, look at that 2019 list and put all those things on it so they're in a centralized place. So I took everything that's on the 2019 to read list that I own and put on that shelf. And there was still a lot of space on it. So I started looking at what had been on it. And I'm like, some of these I really want to read and haven't. And so I put those on it. And then everything that's not an immediate to read, I reshelved elsewhere. And then I just kind of walked around my house and started grabbing things that I saw that I hadn't read yet, just to fill it up. Because wouldn't it be great if I had a shelf in a centralized location that has on it not only everything that I know that I want to read this year that I own, they're all right there, don't have to dig for them, but then also is filled up with a bunch of stuff that I know I haven't read that I want to get to at some point. So I filled it up completely with things I haven't read and made sure I put everything on it that I want to read this year that I was in possession of. And went to put a picture of it on Instagram because isn't that fun? And in that process realized that there's something I had never heard of until after I had stocked the shelf and got it already. It's the Unread Shelf Project. And it's an Instagram challenge created by Whitney. She's at the Unread Shelf. And she has challenges for each month of the year. And I think January's was just read an unread book, like read something off your unread shelf. And then there were challenges from there on out. But it was like during the first week of January, everybody featured on Instagram one day, every day for 1 week, a book off their unread shelf, you know, where they got it and why they wanted to read it and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, this is fun. I'm not doing it the way the challenge is laid out because she's doing it by count. Like, how many books did she read off her unread shelf any given month? How many did she get rid of? You know, if there are ones you find that you're just not gonna read. And then how many did she acquire? I don't have a count of my total unread books because they certainly don't all fit on that shelf. But I'm doing the monthly challenges, and my plan was to not add anything. I did a little bit of changing of it at first when I first set it up, but other than that, to not add anything to the shelf over the course of the year, because I don't think I'm going to get to all of it, but at least then I'll have a sense of how much I've managed to move through. So that's what I did, and I've been keeping track of it on Instagram. If you're curious and you want to know, I'm not going to turn this show into my blow by blow of what I've read and each month and how I'm doing on the goals, because frankly, that's not that interesting to me to make podcast episodes out of. But if you are interested, I do have Instagram stories on my highlights that have the initial goals and then each month's updates for how it's going. Like I say, when I started, I want to say 21. It was 21 or 22 on that 2019 list, plus there were 4 or 5 that were in progress. So since I started, it's March now. There are currently 19 still on the list. So I haven't made a huge dent in the list yet, but I also finished everything that was in progress. So, you know, moving forward step by step. And I haven't read everything that I've done that has taken off the list. Like, there were a couple, I think 3, that I ended up removing from the list because I started them and it was like, this is just not for me. And I also kind of keep track of the things that I'm doing that are off list. So at the end of every month when I do my wrap, I'll also kind of show what I picked up at random, because I still give myself permission to pick up at random. I'm trying to do a little bit less in bookstores, a little bit more at the library, but you know, do a little bit of both. Just the act of having a goal, though, has been really helpful. It keeps me motivated. It's fun and exciting when I see new things come in on Library Hold, and I know that that's coming something off the goal list. And I also am really enjoying this Unread Shelf project. So like I said, January's was just to read a book off your unread shelf. So I did a couple. And then February's was to read something that's been gifted to you. And the rule is, once you choose your book that you're going to read for the Unread Shelf project, you have the month to either read it or get rid of it. And I picked Anna Quinlan's Lots of Candles, Plenty of Cake, which was gifted to me for Christmas a few years ago. And I thought, you know, I just turned 40. This is probably my year to read this book. And just didn't care for it. So the rule of thumb is that if you're not going to read it, it goes away. So it went away in the book purge. My March pick. So March's is the book that's been on your shelf the longest. And I really couldn't tell because I can't remember when I acquired some of those books. but I decided it was probably Stephen King's On Writing, which I've read some of many years ago, but not nearly all of. So that's what I'm going to do for March. And on my to read 2019 list is Hearts in Atlantis. So that'll be a good Stephen King pairing to do those two together for March. I want to get the list of the challenges so I can tell you what my plans are. So I kind of have them planned out. March we did. April is the book you most recently acquired. There's a few that I pretty recently acquired, but one of them was there's a book by Michael Rosen, What is Poetry, which is middle grade, and April's Poetry Month. So the plan is to do that in April. May is a book you bought because of the movie, TV, or theater adaptation, which I don't do. I don't do that, like, at all. But the closest thing in my world that I could think of is I have a book that's an autobiography by Christopher Milne, kind of about what it was like to have his father, A.A. Milne, base a whole award-winning children's book series on his life. That's on my to-read list for 2019, so planning to do that in May. June is a book about travel or set in a country you've never been to. I have a couple of choices for this one. I will probably try Anna Quinlan's Imagined London, but I do have some 19th century travel logs that come from a series that reprinted old women's travel logs, but I will probably save those for July, because July is a book from a series on your shelf, so I'll probably do one or more of those in July. August says a book voted for you to read by Instagram. The last time I put out a poll on Bookstagram to see what I should read next, and nobody voted. So I might try again, or I might just pick something. September, a book you can buddy read with somebody. I don't know if anybody's going to buddy read anything with me. So I either will or I won't. October, a book that scares you, whether because of length, content, or actual horror level. There's a book that was like one of my husband's favorite books of all time, and he literally has a print of the author hanging in our house, and it's on the shelf, and I might take that one on for October because my fear is I'm not gonna like it and it's gonna mess with him. November, a book from your favorite genre. I haven't picked that yet. December, the shortest book on your shelf, which I might do, but by December I think I might have cleared that shelf off and be back in Christmas mode, so I might just skip that one entirely. So that's the Unread Shelf project, and that's been fun to be a participant in. Lots of people out there on Bookstagram. I like Bookstagram. I'm a Bookstagram kind of, like, I feel like I'm Bookstagram adjacent, because I am not at all interested in dialoguing with publishers and getting advanced reader copies and book blogging and reviewing. I don't want any part of any of that. That's just not my scene. I want to talk to other bookish people and see their pictures, and that's fun. But I'm a librarian. If I want advanced reader copies, I know where I can get them. I really just like sticking with my reading life as it is. And I like, one of the nice things about not being full-time in the library right now is I get to read exactly what I want. I don't have book talks looming. I don't have, the kinds of things that I was having to do before that were dictating some of what I had to read. I don't have any of that. So I get to be in control of my reading life. And I have some things I want to say about that in episodes to come. And I'm hoping you'll be interested in hearing some of my book life, like reasons to love the backlist and, the joy of abandoning books and some of the things that I want to talk to you all about coming up. So, has having reading goals helped me? There is no question that I read more. I feel like I'm completing more books, and the ones I'm not completing, I'm more intentional about not completing. It's not, I left it somewhere and don't know where it is and there's other things going on. It's more of I tried this and I don't like it and I'm moving on. So it's definitely increased my reading productivity. Does make me feel like I'm on the clock a little bit. There's one book that I'm working through pretty slowly. It's by Louisa May Alcott. It's a little known novel of her called Work, which is a semi-autobiographical story of a woman working her way through many jobs. And it's kind of a look at 19th century women and work. And it's 19th century, so it's just kind of slower. The language is more dense, and I'm just moving through it more slowly. And I am sincerely enjoying it. But sometimes I have to force myself to be like, okay, it's okay. Like, maybe I only made it through 40 pages of this book today. And this book has been in process since January, and I've read it in and amongst other things, but I have to remind myself there's not a report card at the end of this. Like, it's not to slog through these books because I need to get them done. It's because these were books I wanted to read, so I'm making them a priority, but I want to make sure I'm also sitting in the moment with the reading that I'm doing. So there's a double-edged sword, right, of giving yourself an assignment that can cut both ways. So I'm having to be intentional about letting myself off the hook and remembering that this is supposed to be because of joy, that I'm keeping myself accountable, but it is a hobby and it is a joy. And really what reading is for me at this phase of my life, it fills the same role that podcasting does. It keeps me in the grown-up world so that I have a little bit of me mixed in with the mom with kids. Nobody's paying me any money to podcast. Nobody's paying me any money to read and review books. I'm doing it because it's a joy and it's an outlet. So I need to keep it in that realm. So it's a double-edged sword, but I think definitely more good than bad for me at that point. Interestingly, though, none of the books that were my goal books for this year that I've read to date have popped in terms of, oh my God, that was the best thing. Like, some of them I've really enjoyed. There was a book that I read called Called to Create in January that was sort of an entrepreneur or creative person's faith journey. And I wasn't sure I was going to like it, and it kind of surprised me, and that was nice. So there have definitely been some that have been like fun and good, and I would give a good review. But if I think about my favorite book of each month so far, there's only been 2 months, but neither of them have been books that came off the list. Neither of them have been books that were even on my bigger TBR list at all. In January, my favorite thing that I read was a book called Ronit and Jamil, and it is a retelling of the Romeo and Juliet story as a novel in verse set in Israel-Palestine. That book really surprised me, and I actually really enjoyed it. I think it's my favorite thing that I read in January. It was a divisive book. I looked at Goodreads reviews of it. A lot of people really didn't like it. I think a lot of people don't like novels in verse, though, and I do. So, and obviously, the Romeo and Juliet story is a little unbelievable. So if you think about it too much, I mean, these kids falling in love with each other the first time they see each other and whatever, it doesn't really work. But I loved that book. It was really immersive, and I really, really enjoyed it. It was my favorite read of January. And then my favorite read of February really caught me out of the blue. It's called No One Ever Asked. Oh, geez, I don't have the author in front of me. Katie Ganshert. And I picked that one up off of a display, not just at the library, but the church library. It's Christian fiction, which, guys, I'm going to tell you, I never read, because contemporary Christian fiction really bothers me, because I feel like even if it's good, then I'll be stuck in this really good story, and here's the part where they talk about God. It just feels like this giant exposition dump. So I rarely read it. But I picked this book up because it was blurbed by Lisa Wingate, who wrote, what's that book called? The Before We Were Yours, which I was reading at that time. And I ended up liking this one better than Before We Were Yours. It was really good, and definitely it had faith elements in it, but it didn't have that Christian fiction feel of, this is the part where we talk about how much God means to us, and then we go back. It didn't have any of that as part of it. It was a great book. I loved it. It made me feel brave enough to take on The Hate U Give again. I tried to read The Hate U Give last fall when I was pretty newly postpartum, and I couldn't handle it emotionally. No One Ever Asked takes on a similar topic, and I was like, okay, I'm going to put The Hate U Give back on hold at the library and try it again. So it was great, and neither one of those was anywhere near my TBR list. They both were things I grabbed because they were on display at whatever library I happened to be in at that point. So I'm definitely giving myself permission to do that. Like, your book recommendation that you didn't ask for today is one that falls in that category, because I didn't know this book existed. And now I'm going to tell you why you need to read this book. You need to read this book if you are someone who is interested in the intersection of faith and creativity. I know I just talked about another book related to that, but this one is the one you need to pick up. And you need to pick it up because it has such intersectionality in it, because it is a talk about a broader conversation around faith and it's got some theology in it. It's got some philosophy in it. It's deep, but it's one of those books that everything you read in it, you're going to want to write as a quote and hang on your bulletin board. And it is, the reason I picked it up is because it is by the late, great Madeleine L'Engle. And somebody posted just on Facebook. I don't even think this was in one of my book spaces. This was just out there on Facebook. And I knew as soon as I saw it, I have to read that. So if you are somebody who is a creative person who is just interested in the combination of faith and creativity, it's not preachy, but one of the things I love about it is the very first thing she talks about when you open this book. So I started reading this on a day off that my friend gave me from my children. It was a birthday gift. My birthday was several months ago, but this was when it finally got scheduled. She said, I'm taking both of your kids for the day and you go do whatever the heck you want. And so as part of my day off, I picked up this book, and the very first thing she talks about is that she's finally given herself permission to just be. That after years, when she was however old she was when she wrote this book, it came out in 1995. Mrs. L'Engle passed away in, I think, 2007. After however many years, she finally has realized she doesn't need to make excuses. She doesn't need to apologize for just sitting in stillness and being. And the writer in me knows how important that is to incubate story. The person of faith in me, the line that immediately comes to mind is, be still and know that I am God. It is Madeleine L'Engle. So again, it's not that kind of Christian that you think you know. It's got so much philosophy. It's got so much theology. It's the kind of thing where you want to look up all the things that she talks about. And she talks about how she's collected this just in a notebook over the years of just inspiration from these people throughout history and throughout the broader world of faith. It's lovely. It's not an easy read, though. You know, this is not pick this up to get inspired kind of stuff. This is like deep think requires you to put your brain on kind of stuff, but in a very inspiring way. So if you are that person, that is your book recommendation you didn't ask for today. I'm currently working on it. It's in progress right now. But that's one that, like, when I found out it existed, it made me drop everything on the list and was like, okay, I'm putting that one on hold at the library right now. And sometimes I'll go back to my bigger TBR list. You know, I'm reading right now a book about Negro Leaguer Buck O'Neil. In his last year of life, traveling with this sports writer to kind of find the soul of baseball in America. And it wasn't on the to read 2019 list, but it was one I had heard of a while back, and it was on kind of the bigger to be read list. And it was a phase in life where I needed to think of spring. So I wanted a good baseball book, so I put it on hold. So I'm not boxing myself in by this setting of goals, but it's funny. I spend my life talking to kids about reading goal setting and keeping them reading in summer reading. And so many of our summer reading programs are built around having a goal and keeping a goal. And these last few months is really the first time I've kind of done that big time for myself. And it was to get me through this transition from mom of one to mom of two, which I said all along that I didn't think there could be a bigger transition than there was from mom of none to mom of one. And I still stand by that, especially given the way my older son entered this world. But definitely this transition from mom of one to mom of two is no joke. And keeping myself reading during it has been a gift to myself in more ways than one. So that's what having and making reading goals has done for me. I'm curious to know what having and making reading goals has done for any of you. If you'd like to share, I'm in all the usual places. So you can hit me up, noextrawords@gmail.com. And I'm at noextrawords in all of your fun social media places. Instagram is probably my favorite bookish place to hang out, but I've also been posting book covers over on Twitter this week, and that's been fun too. So that's my thoughts for today on reading goals. And I have so many more things, bookish topics that I want to talk to you guys about in weeks to come. So I'm hoping to pop back on the mic and talk to you soon. It's fun to be back. I'm not committing to a regular release schedule at this point. I'm going to try to just kind of do this for a bit and see how it settles. I'm hoping to get on some kind of a regular schedule because I know it's easier for you to listen and for me to record if we know what's coming. But I'm not quite sure at this moment what that's going to look like. So right now I'm giving myself permission to pop in and out until I figure that out. But it's been fun talking to you all, and I hope you'll stay in touch, and I hope to be back on the mic talking to you very soon as we continue season 3, Chris's audio book journal. Take care.